Welcome back, everybody, to the ROI Online Podcast. And today, I'm really grateful and I'm proud to introduce you to JD Sherman, the now former, soon to be former president and COO of HubSpot. JD, welcome to the ROI Online Podcast.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
You know, I've gotten to know you when I go to Partner Day or the things that where we get to interact somewhat with the leadership, and there are some presentations of yours that I really enjoyed and connected with you, and the thing is you bring this personality and a way of engagement of explaining things plus a entertaining way, and it was really connects, and I've learned a lot from you. One of your presentations that you gave was the LTV to CAC, the the long-term value and the cost of customer acquisition, and
Right.
and then I've seen you do some others, and you wear your Mick Jagger or Aerosmith like coat that's got the
Yeah.
HubSpot branding, and I've just really enjoyed you, and so and then the fact that you endorsed or wrote a blurb for my book was huge, and so that's why I'm proud to have you and excited to have you on today.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
This the situation that we find ourselves in where many businesses have had to send their people home and try to figure out a way to stay relevant, a way to stay productive, and to quickly pivot maybe on technology or concepts. And there's this if they were ever dragging their feet about considering marketing automation or video conferencing or any of these other technologies that help us be more effective or efficient. Um, Now it's really on their mind. And so, you know, when a CFO is talking to someone and learning about these technologies, you can relate how they are maybe hesitant about investing in those.
Yeah.
And so, how do you think they're looking at it now? What do you think that they need to avoid, and how should they really they have to sell it to the rest of the organization as
hmm
as well?
Sure. Sure.
Tell,
Well, one of the things that I talked about in one of my talks, which was how to teach your CFO inbound marketing, basically, I talked about how CFOs and COOs like myself, I'm a former CFO as well, we kind of have this hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom of the pyramid is sort of business continuity is one of the things that's out there. And you always hate investing in business continuity because it's sort of like an insurance policy. You don't need it until it's the only thing you need. Um, but that's a very valid way to look at this investment. That's sort of one thought. The second one is we're in the middle of this really interesting experiment. It's not a perfect experiment because in a perfect experiment, you would just isolate one variable and there's a lot of stuff going on. But everybody is being forced to figure out how to work online. I think a lot of people are figuring out that there is a real benefit to that. That the fear that if I don't send my sales reps around and have those face-to-face meetings, then my close rates aren't going to be as good, or my the investment I'm making in my sales force is not going to return. I think we're going to see that that's probably in a lot of cases not the case. So there's a little bit of a forced experiment. And the third thing I would say, and it's a little bit not necessarily a CFO type observation, but what's really happening here is not, I mean, there are the outliers of the situation. There are the companies and the technologies that are real big beneficiaries of this, the Zooms, the remote learning platforms, et cetera. There are the people that are really, really getting hit by this, which are the restaurants and the travel and entertainment. In the middle, though, is just this big blob of business that is starting to have to realize and getting sort of a kick in the pants that, hey, yeah, the way that people live, work, shop, and buy really is changing. And we've got to respond to it. And so I think what's going to happen out of this is you're going to get like an acceleration of those trends that already existed.
yes, I see that these when I came to partner day, or when I would show up at Inbound and I would watch the presentations as HubSpot rolled out upgrades in their technology as far as the CRM component or other aspects. And I would sit, for example, the CRM it's free. Here you have a industrial grade, super, it's so easy to set up and use, and it's so user friendly. And as a salesperson, I've used so many of these CRMs, and this one's just so intuitive and easy to customize. And I wondered why are they rolling it out for free? And it was interesting to me because, well, they've spent several years evaluating this, and the market showing that there's going to be a high demand for that. So you're maneuvering to take advantage of that. So I'd come back and set my team up to start to adopt it and implement it. Give us some insight on how an organization like HubSpot evaluates those opportunities and then aligns the resources to roll it out. And what do you see as the future on just that CRM piece?
Yeah. Well, I think that it was a very big decision for us to make that CRM free and adopt sort of a freemium try before you buy model. And the way we really thought about it was, the way people want to buy today has just dramatically changed. You have to add value before you extract value to get people to buy today. That means people want to try before they buy. That means people want to take the friction out of the experience with a vendor. And we wanted to try to totally remove the friction out of adopting our CRM. And then hopefully a lot of people will continue to use it and it'll be super valuable to them as a free tool. But a bunch of folks will grow with us and we'll help them grow, and they'll grow into some of our more advanced tools. And that, and it goes back to a little bit of we were mentioning about LTV to CAC. We think that if you can introduce people to your product that way, it's both going to reduce the cost of acquiring those customers because they're introducing themselves to the product in just the way that they want to do it. But also, since they've experienced the software, they kind of know what they're in for, and they'll stick around longer. And then the lifetime value of them when they become paying customers is going to be really good. So there's sort of like match your marketing and sales to the way people want to live, work, shop, and buy. And out of that will come a very healthy business model as well.
So how long did that conversation about the CRM go on behind the scenes? By the time they roll it out to the public, there's a long cycle there.
Yeah.
And then the future is, you've made that decision. You're really clear and committed on the justification for that alignment. Yeah.
Well, we looked at the market when we were starting to do, as you know, we started with basically a marketing application and we extended it to marketing automation as well. So we kind of had the top and the middle of the funnel. We felt like we needed the bottom of the funnel. We felt we needed that CRM. So we actually looked at the market very closely and we talked to a bunch of companies who were startups trying to build a CRM. And what we noticed was a few things. One, there were a lot of them. A lot of people trying to basically out Salesforce. And they all had some pretty interesting technology and all this kind of stuff. But the second thing we noticed was none of them were really getting traction. And we were asking ourselves, why are they not getting traction? And what we concluded was it wasn't the technology, it was the business model. It's going to be very difficult to go out in the marketplace and try to out Salesforce, who it's a great product. It's a de facto CRM for a lot of businesses these days. We thought for our mid-market, the problem was adoption. The problem was getting people to adopt a CRM, and the old playbook of a direct sales force trying to get people to engage and start using a CRM when maybe they didn't even understand the power of doing that wasn't gonna work for what we wanted to do. So we had to make a product that's really easy to adopt and easy to use, and then allow customers to adopt it on their own terms. By the way, there's a really nice little virtuous cycle there, because for that to work, the product has to get really good. When the product gets really good, more and more people will adopt it, and you can keep that flywheel spinning. And that's really what's happened with our CRM. The biggest probably side benefit for us of doing that was it really, really forced us to make that a very good product. Ironically, the product has to be better in a freemium model where it costs less than it probably has to be if you're charging $1,000 or $10,000 a month.
I love that CRM. So the epiphany for me was, well, why are we doing all this marketing automation? We're doing it to generate a contact record. And that CRM now is taking it the rest of the way. You think about a business process. All right, we set up a website, people are going to fill out a form, and they're going to give you their contact information. But what do you do with it now? And how do you turn that little that asset into a relationship? And that's where the real gold is. And to me, that was the brilliance of the free CRM, because the more contacts you're generating, like that flywheel, the more relationships a business could adopt. And what amazes me, the businesses that there's the 98% of the businesses in the American economy have 20 or less employees,
Mm-hmm.
and most of them don't have a CRM,
That's right.
and they're just
Yeah.
winging it.
Yeah, they're basically, and well, we saw a lot of that in ourselves. Like when we started to go down this path, in addition to looking at the market, we obviously looked at what our own customers wanted, and it wasn't hard to tell. Like we had like if you looked at our, our user suggestion input, it was, can you build us a CRM? But most of our customers, and we had we still have a very large bit of smaller customers, but most of our customers were exporting the data into a spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
That to us was a sign that they're really losing. They're letting, as you sort of talked about, they're letting some of the value of creating that engagement leak out. So what you really are doing when you're matching your marketing automation and your top of the funnel type tools to the CRM is you're matching your system of engagement with a system of record, and that's a really powerful combination.
So we're thinking about the business leaders and owners, why they would justify implementing this, because when you set up a CRM, you're triggering off a whole set of business changes inside a business.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to get that record? Who's going to manage that record? Who's accountable? What's the outcome, and how do we show revenue for it? And we'd been a HubSpot Platinum partner for a while, and when I saw the CRM come out, I'd had this conversation with several clients, but when they would come up to you and go, "You're doing all this great work, but I just don't think it's helping anything."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're getting these form fills, but and it was amazing. We were dropping these leads on their desk, but they were just moving them out of their way.
Mm-hmm.
And the brilliance of that CRM and bringing that into the product mix was, actually, we probably should have started with the CRM conversation first.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a conversation one time with a customer, a great guy. He had a Taekwondo, basically empire, honestly, in the UK. He had like 7 or 8 Taekwondo places, and he was using HubSpot marketing. He was blogging, using social media and everything, and he was absolutely killing it. I mean, he was getting all sorts of growth in his contacts and everything. And then he called to cancel. And I said, well, this is very interesting, because my hypothesis was, if you're adding contacts, HubSpot's working. We're creating value for you. And it should be a good thing. So I just called him up, and he was very generous with his time. And I asked him how he used it and everything. And I said, well, you're getting all these leads. What are you doing with these leads? And he said, what do you mean? I said, what, I mean, are you calling them? Are you giving them calls to action? Are you engaging with them? And he's like, no, I don't really have time for that. And I'm like, okay, well then see, that's the part that's missing. And if I bring that back to the sort of CFO lens, it's so, that attribution is so important. When we think about the investment, we want to tie it all the way to revenue. And if you do that with inbound marketing and match it with a great connection to your CRM and your sales program, you can really nail that attribution. And it's, just makes it easier to understand the return on investment of your marketing dollars.
So that conversation that you had with him, if I backed up and I had several of those, and I'm going, all right, well, let me evaluate where I'm responsible in the failure of the getting it right. And what I realized, I'm very sales oriented. And so I just assumed these organizations were too.
Mm-hmm.
And when I ran into HubSpot, one of the things that really impressed me about HubSpot was they have their act together as far as the sales process. You got a great sales team. You got a great sales process. Mark Greco was the one that and when
Yeah,
I first met him and watched him sell, I was just, he was my hero. I loved how he did that sales process. But the thing that was missing with my clients, they didn't have that mindset.
yeah,
And that was a big light bulb for me, is that the process that we integrate, that
mm,
needs to be a big mandatory component, or this investment, so to speak, is not, at some point they're going to go, why am I paying for this? I'm not seeing the needle move.
yeah. We actually call it Smarketing, as you might know. That sales and
Hmm.
marketing basically have to be the same thing. And when Mark Greco gets a qualified lead through our inbound marketing, he has to realize, and he does because he's an expert, that he's just extending that process. We're still in a helping versus selling mode. We're trying to understand what the customer needs, and it needs to be a seamless thing. It can't be just like a handed down the factory floor. You have to think about when you're building your sales and marketing processes, those seams in the process are what really kill you if you're trying to take friction out of your process. And so you have to get really good at that. And as we've extended into more of a product driven sale, we've stopped calling it Smarketing. We call it Sparketing to get the product piece in there.
Hmm.
And for the first time ever, a couple of years ago, we gave the product team effectively a quota. We said, you guys have to, when you're building these freemium products, you have to think about creating opportunities for our sales team to engage with customers and getting them to buy.
What I One of the other challenges that we have is people come super oriented around their website,
Yeah.
and they're not realizing that this is a business process, not just this nice, fun little marketing thing we can do on the side that's kind of mandatory. We need a website, but we're really building out an asset that's going to drive revenue. It's going to drive the value of the business later. When you want to sell it, you'll have all this data and see
Yeah.
the system. The lead comes here, goes out this end. And I think that I've watched HubSpot mature in some way and in assembling those pieces. Did you come from a real sales oriented background? I mean, coming in as a CFO, and then this, like, might be something that you didn't want to really dabble in, or what?
Well, my father was a salesman for 30 years for IBM, and I spent my first 15 years of my career at IBM in finance, though. And, I've had a lot of experience, though, with selling to very large enterprises. So when I came to HubSpot and took over on the sales and marketing organizations, I really had never done this kind of thing, and particularly for small businesses. And I had to learn really quickly that it's a different thing when you're selling to small business than when you're selling to enterprises, and mostly to a client base that you've had for 50 years. It's a very different thing.
So when the CFOs that, or these business leaders or the business owners, entrepreneurs, they wear a CFO hat, they wear a product hat, they wear a management hat, they wear an
Right.
HR hat. The the way to, what would you say to someone like, all right, we're going to get this HubSpot technology or equivalent.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you sell it to your organization that you're leading? Because it's intimidating, it's software,
It
and
is.
yet it's a business process too.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that I always talk about when you think about if you're trying to sell it to a business oriented, entrepreneurial minded person, we have this mindset of return on investment, ROI, and we can wrap our head around it when we're building a factory or something like that. Because the way accounting works is when you're building a factory, you capitalize all the expenses, they go on your balance sheet. And then when the factory starts churning out widgets, that's when you start to recognize the cost. But there's like a big upfront investment that we're all comfortable with. And then at night, we can go home and sleep, and our factory is churning out these widgets.
Hmm.
Well, a website done right or inbound marketing done right is exactly the same thing, only you don't get to account for it that way. You don't get to capitalize it. But what you're basically doing is you're making an investment in a website to drive your business. You're making an investment in creating your own content assets, and assets are a really key word here. And there's an upfront cost to that. But what happens when you get it right is the widgets start coming out even as you go home and sleep because you've made that upfront investment. So that's the story that I think really resonates when I talk to businesses about making this investment.
So you come from a different background. You weren't in marketing automation technology when you began to work with HubSpot. When did the light bulb go off for you as far as this online asset stuff, right? You're excited.
Mm-hmm.
You get to work for a great company,
Yeah.
but there was some time and all of a sudden it really clicked with you. Talk to
Yeah.
us.
I think what really clicked with me was so when Brian and Dharmesh, the founders, started this company, it was really about two things. And when they explained it to me, it almost immediately clicked. I'm like, yeah, there's a big opportunity here. The first thing was that people are still marketing and selling very traditional way, even though the way people live, work, shop, and bought had just fundamentally changed. Everybody has moved online. You couldn't interrupt people anymore. Fundamentally, couldn't interrupt people anymore. So that was sort of realization number one. And you say, yeah, now I look back 10 years later, it's like quite obvious. Back then, it was a little bit of a realization. The second realization was, though, you need technology to pull this playbook off, particularly at scale. And of course, if you think about what marketing automation is, it's technology, it's automation technology to help humans do a better job of what they're really good at in
Hmm.
some sense. And that applies, I've put in automation systems effectively across all sorts of, business processes. And this is one to me, it's like, if we can apply that same if we can bring technology to bear for marketing and sales, boy, there's a real opportunity. And if we can democratize that technology so that you don't have to be an IBM or a General Electric or a General Motors to afford this and have a big, IT department, you really have something. Because what online marketing, what the internet, what the modern consumer does is it sort of gives a small business an opportunity to compete with the big guys.
I think of folks that are wanting to do a startup where they're pitching a potential investment into their company, and I wonder how many investors are asking, well, talk to me a little more about your sales process and your technology. How are you going to implement this business development process with technology and take advantage of the trends? Do you see that conversation happening as much as you would like, or do you think that's like a real potential advantage for someone pitching if they can really clearly
Yeah.
communicate that?
Well, it's really, really interesting. If I think about the consumer world, the direct to
Mhm.
consumer businesses, that is their entire pitch. You think about the Casper mattresses or the Pelotons or the whatever. That is their entire pitch. It's like, yeah, I sell a mattress, but the way I sell it and engage is the magic here. It's the Netflix, it's all that kind of stuff. What's interesting is you're starting to see some of those lessons come into the B2B world as well.
Mhm.
And, as Brian always says, it's how you sell these days is why you win. It's not anymore that, your product has to be 10x better. It's that whole customer experience has to be 10x better. So what I'm hearing and seeing, even in some of the really remarkable startups in the Boston area is, we're going to change we're going to disrupt the customer experience rather than the product itself. And boy, that's resonating with VCs these days for sure.
Um, I heard this quote the other day. Someone said, our value is our process, not our product. And the beauty to me of marketing automation and sales automation and strategic campaigns and
Mhm.
clear messaging, I think are the four fundamentals that you have to do this. But the beauty of those things complement, expedite, they're like force multipliers on a process in pretty much any process.
Mhm.
What's like one of the most unusual processes where you've seen someone adopt that similarly and have great results that you wouldn't have expected?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can just take the one that I'm most familiar with, because Brian just won't stop talking about it because he's a big dog guy, is this
Yeah.
company Chewy,
What's the
right?
name of the company?
Chewy.com. Uh, they have basically they're dominating the basically the dog food and dog goods market just because of their customer experience, the way they basically build a relationship with your pet. And you're like, oh wow, that's very interesting. And to the extent you can extend that idea into any business, it just makes a ton of sense. So there are just these examples where literally a commodity uh, that they sell, but they transform the way people shop for that commodity. And boy, it's a huge hit. Warby Parker's another one. All of these kind of direct to consumer uh, companies. And so now, we start to see some of our customers taking those ideas, and we're trying to do the same, taking those ideas to the B2B world. Another super interesting company in the B2B world that we have gone to school on, and we have their president on our board, is Atlassian, which is an enterprise software company. I think they have a market capitalization of 35 billion or something like that, a couple $1 billion of revenue. They don't have a single salesperson. In their mind, software is something that is bought, not sold, and they run that playbook. And so it's really about their buying experience as much as their software.
Buying, bought, not sold. That's, when we think about going from interruption-based marketing to inbound-based, that's going from to bought from sold. From hey, you need this. Let me just tell you whatever you need to hear to convince you to do this to make my quota. To
Yeah.
hey, you're safe. Evaluate this at your speed. What else would you like to know? And
Mm-hmm.
then when you're ready, let me know, and then we'll talk about just the last few steps of how your situation looks here with us. That's, I see a lot of companies also going to more of a teaching mode instead of selling whatever their product is. I'll just teach you how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Like
Th-
I think about your Mark Greco example. When you listen to a good sales call by a guy like Mark Greco, if it's a 30-minute call, the first 28 minutes are Mark asking his prospect about his business and talking about it. And the call has gone well when the first question comes back the other way. And then Mark feels he has the license to bring up HubSpot. Until then, not so much, right? You don't want to have that conversation. You want to figure out what problem we're trying to solve here and all this kind of stuff. And some of our really good salespeople I've heard say, really enjoy the conversation. I don't think it makes sense to go forward. It's not necessarily a fit here. And so, yeah, you have to be careful about the incentives you have and how hard you're pushing your sales teams and everything like that. But it really is a process. No matter, you can slot. There's a continuum of it's a totally touchless process versus this very heavily involves humans. But no matter where you are in that continuum, you need to be thinking about the adding value before you extract value.
The HubSpot's been remote selling forever.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of organizations that are going, will we be able to actually do a sales call via Zoom or something? What was the thing that surprised you about how HubSpot was totally comfortable with that? It's normal, right?
Yeah.
And it's not shocking to you, but to many companies coming up now out of this situation,
Mm-hmm.
that's like a scary thing. They're figuring out, we have to do this.
Yeah, well, for HubSpot, necessity was the mother of invention, because our product cost $250 a month at the start, and you couldn't send people around the country trying to sell your software. And the key, what's interesting about when you sell a product like that, the hard part is reach. The hard part is actually not the sales engagement. The hard part is the reach and finding the customers who where the demand is. And the secret there is really inbound marketing. The secret there is helping, not selling. The secret is creating great content assets that people come to you. And then it's not a pushy conversation on the phone. It's a helpful conversation. Now, I have to be honest, like there are some things that are never going to be sold that way. Like when you buy a Boeing airliner, you're probably going to have to go and bring all your, engineers and all this kind of stuff and bring your flow charts and things like that. But, for software, modern software, certainly, and services as well, uh, th- that's the way the world is going. I mean, that's sort of where we started our conversation. And, the tools are becoming more and more powerful and available to enable that kind of thing.
So the CFO is needing to be more also CTO-ish and CMO-ish, right? You're seeing a merging of these roles
Mm.
and the comfortable considering, all right, I need to think of this revenue generating roles that are coming in here instead of an expense. But same with sales. They're not only conducting sales, but they can be creating content at the same time. How how do you get a CMO, CFO, CTO together on the same page? Because they're usually segmented or what do you call them? Pillared.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're in silos. Yeah. I
Silos.
always tell the story when I first joined my prior company, which is Akamai Technologies, as the CFO. Within a couple of weeks, the CMO comes in my office and he says, "Hey, I have an opportunity that is short-lived, so I need your approval really fast on this. We want to put Akamai Technologies on the Green Monster at Fenway Park." I'm like, really? Like, that sounds really cool because I would love my company's name on the Green Monster at Fenway Park. But like, how much does it cost? How do we know it's working? Like, how do we know we're going to get customers that way? And he says, well, you have to make a $3 million commitment or something like that. I'm like, really? That seems like a lot. How many customers are we going to get from that? And he got frustrated in my office and said, you just don't get it. You just don't understand how marketing works. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. If that's, I don't. But what the way to help a CFO understand how marketing works is try to put some attribution around what you're doing. Like we get as a finance person, operation person, we get that you have to invest in a brand and there's brand equity and everything like that. But most of marketing is about demand generation, and you can dashboard that. You can figure out the value. Obviously, you can figure out that cost per of a lead, and then you can figure out what percentage of those leads convert, and then you can figure out what percentage of those become actual customers, and then of the types of those uh, customers you get, which ones of them are long-lasting customers with very high LTVs, and which ones of them are not. And so, my observation, at least what the marketers that I've interacted with, is they're much more analytical. Like they know their way around a spreadsheet and Looker and other tools much more than the marketer that I thought of back when I was at IBM and sort of met when I showed up at Akamai.
Seems like it'd be stressful to observe Mark Greco selling, and you listen for 36 minutes or whatever, and he's just asking questions. And you're like, we're investing in this time, and he's not selling. There's this point of going, well, how do you get an ROI on this?
Yeah.
Give value and create a relationship. How do you answer that question?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the rubber meets the road, and you measure you can measure, does Mark make his quota or not? And then you got to figure it out and move you move backwards up the funnel or up the pipeline and see what's breaking down and what's working and what's not working. But I will tell you, we're having a lot of this conversation around sort of the ROI and everything. The big mistake that I've seen a lot of companies make is they over obsess on that, and you sort of ignore what the customer is telling you.
There you go.
And what you're going to find there is you may have short-term results that backfire on you long-term. That's the lifetime value is a real important measure of that. Like in my early days at HubSpot, we were signing up a lot of customers that were not going to be successful at HubSpot. And we had to look at the incentives of our sales team and say, what's happening here? Like we're pushing them to sign up customers. That's what they're getting paid for. we actually changed that incentive to be, they have to be successful customers. If they're not successful, then you're not going to get promoted. Your quota is going to get raised, et cetera. We had to, we had to fundamentally get the incentives aligned with having successful customers, particularly in this day and age where customers have a loud voice, louder than your own marketing. You definitely have to have that model. So at the end of the day, you have to be careful not to over index on just the, how'd I do this month, and should I be pushing harder? Should I be pushing on deals created in my Salesforce because it looked like the number of deals that this team was creating were too low? You just have to be a little careful about that.
Yeah, that's now we're talking about not only CMO, CTO, CFO. Now I got to be like a sales oriented as well, and that's intimidating to most people because they've got this anti-sales view.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I think you hit it when you said you got to be thinking from your customer's point of view and how you're connecting with them, and it's about creating this human
Mm-hmm.
connection and relationship. So
Yeah.
where are things going in the future? Or we know you don't have the crystal ball and all, but there's something some data you guys have been studying. Where do you see things are going? It's for the companies that are listening to this podcast. What can they be preparing for?
Hmm. Well, to bring it back to sort of where we are in the current day, I think we've all identified some of the trends with how the world is changing for people and the way they live, work, shop, and buy. I think what we have going on right now is going to be an accelerant for that. I think we're teaching people, we're teaching consumers that they can get a lot more done online and are going to expect to be able to get a lot more done online. They're not going to want to go in person to visit places. They're probably going to be working from home. So they're just that's going to happen more and more. We're seeing businesses who primarily relied on offline sources for leads, like trade shows and traditional advertising, realizing very quickly that they're behind the eight ball. And while they've always had on their minds that we got to develop a better digital presence, now it's do or die. So I think what you're seeing is that we're having an accelerant of the trends that we've all known are out there.
What are you most proud of being at HubSpot these past, is it 8 years that you've been?
8 years, yeah. I am most proud of how true we've stayed to our mission. Our mission, as you probably know, is to help millions of organizations grow better. And all along the way, it's so tempting to veer from that mission for short-term results. It was so tempting to try to sell our product, just focus on bigger customers and take it up market. It was so tempting to raise prices and have contracts terms that are more, onerous to sort of boost short-term results. And we've just avoided that as a company. My favorite story about HubSpot is when I first joined HubSpot, I had just come from Akamai, and we grew to $1 billion. When I started Akamai, we were a small company. We grew to $1 billion by the end of the decade. It was awesome. So I said in one of my first company meetings, I said, guys, we're only $20 million in revenue, but I think we can be $1 billion company by the end of the decade. And I'm like, who's with me? And the organization was sort of like, yeah, they clapped and everything, but they were kind of like, who are we helping if we do that? Like, how does that help anybody? What's our mission? And it was a real eye opener for me. And I think that I think we've done a great job over the last 8 years of staying true to that mission. And by the way, the results follow. I'm also super proud of HubSpot and the results and our performance. But the way we did it, we grew better. That's the thing I'm proud of.
The thing I'm really thankful for is really awesome. Didn't expect it, but when this situation settled in and HubSpot reached out and said, "Hey, we know you partners are going to be struggling, and so we would like to forward you your commissions for a couple of quarters," and it's like, wow, that was huge.
Mm.
Where where was the thinking on that? Was that your idea? Where did that come from? I'd love to be in.
Yeah, I think it was when it started to look bad, we said, where are the places that we have to take care of our customers and partners? And still our hope is that this is a short-term phenomenon. Our belief is that our partners are really strong, and if we can help them get through this short-term phenomenon, they're going to be like a coiled spring. And in fact, we've used this coiled spring analogy a lot at HubSpot. Like, we're in really good shape, thankfully. We have $1 billion in the bank. We have a really great recurring revenue business and all this kind of stuff. And so in this crisis, we want to set ourselves up, set our partners up and our customers up as a coiled spring, so that when the world starts to return to normal, and it will, we don't know when, but it will definitely start to return to normal, we're going to be a coiled spring, our partners are going to be a coiled spring, and our customers are going to be a coiled spring, and we can recover really fast and in a really healthy way.
So that decision was, you were thinking in our shoes, not yours.
Absolutely.
That's an experience. That's a relationship. That's connecting. That was like, you bought me some time. I mean, you really helped our agency.
Yeah. Well, it's been the funny thing about the agency, this is the most remarkable solution partner, agency, channel, whatever program I've ever seen, for a bunch of reasons. One is, and I think the core reason is, a lot of the partners have been around as long as HubSpot almost, and joined up with us when it was not clear that HubSpot was actually going to survive. That takes a lot of buy-in, right? When I joined in 2012, we were starting to build the partner community, and we could, who knew what was going to happen with HubSpot? Everybody bought in on the mission, right? The second interesting thing is how much the partners care about each other. Most of the time it's like there's channel conflict and all this, and we come across that, as every now and then. But the partners are trying to help each other, and I think it's because we all have this core mission in mind. We want to help millions of organizations grow better, and we try to move everything out of the way that doesn't get us going on that mission.
So the culture code is a big deal. The academy and the education. You think about agency partners like us, that people don't come to us all ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
We have to train them up. We have to get them acclimated and moved into the modern world of marketing, and that has to honor clear messaging and technology and campaigns, and how you tie all that to a business process and think like a business. And so I think those things have really helped me be a successful agency, just from the investments you guys have made in your team, in your culture, and the products, your educational products. Those are huge. That's just been a big part of our success, to have that resource.
That's great. I mean, it's another big part. If you're going to help millions of people grow better, you can't just provide the software, right? You have to provide the platform. We like to use alliteration. So you have to provide a platform, a philosophy, and people to help, right? And the partners are a really big part of the people. They're becoming a bigger part of the platform too. More and more partners are starting to help our customers with technology and the integration of lots and lots of the pieces of software that they're using to run their business. But partners are a real extension of that people piece of it. Those three things have to come together if you're really going to help millions of organizations grow better.
JD, I really appreciate your time. It's valuable for the folks that listened. And yeah, what if someone wanted to connect with you or stay in touch as you move on?
Yeah.
Where do they find you?
Well, I'll be around at HubSpot for the rest of the year. I'm going to stick around till July 1st as the official president and COO, and make sure we have a great transition to my team, basically reporting directly to Brian, our CEO. And then I'm going to stick around for the rest of the year as an advisor. So you can still get a hold of me through the normal channels of HubSpot, at least till the end of the year.
Well, good. What's one question that you wish people would ask you that they never do?
Question that I wish people would ask me that they never do. Um, that's a great question. That's a great question. You probably, like, if you're trying to figure out how, like, the secret of our success, um, you should be asking about how did you scale your culture from 200 people to 3,000 or 4,000 people where we are right now. That really is, if I had to boil it down to one thing that's worked for HubSpot and one thing that I've seen work for other companies, it's really the culture, because that's the platform for everything else you're gonna do in the company. So, and this is another one for the way CFOs think about it, is when you're investing in culture, like, where's the return on that? It's so hard to measure,
Hmm.
but it's just so fundamentally important. Um, and it has to be in the DNA. It can't just be in your leadership, because, a company like HubSpot, we're growing so fast that if you look at our 3,700 employees right now, literally half of them have been at HubSpot less than 18 months. And yet I think you might agree with me that if you talk to anybody at HubSpot, you still get the sense of the HubSpot culture, whether they've been there 6 months or 6 years. There's just some magic around that. And I wish I knew exactly the playbook for it. I think it's transparency. I think it's articulating it and writing it down, what you're trying to accomplish. I think it's demonstrating it as leaders, but that's the one, like, if you really wanted to dive into, like, the sort of how we built HubSpot, that's what it would be.
That's awesome. JD, I had another question, but I think you killed it. So I appreciate you very much. And um, yeah, thanks for being on the
Yeah,
ROI
my pleasure.
Online Podcast.
My pleasure. Good luck with the book and everything. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, that's a wrap.